Welcome. It has just gone 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Wednesday the 19th of July, and you are watching episode 96 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap, providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, Regions, not your beautiful backyard, is my guest Senator for Queensland, Gerard Rennick. Gerard was born and raised on the family farming property just outside Chinchilla on Queensland's Darling Downs. Thanks to his upbringing and childhood experience, Gerard maintains a deep appreciation for the land, its people, and the challenges they face. Gerard completed his secondary education in Toowoomba before moving to Brisbane, where he completed a commerce degree at the University of Queensland and later a master's degree in taxation law and other applied finance courses. Gerard has extensive experience as a senior financial manager across a range of industries, business types and countries. His experience gives him strong understanding of our economy and how it affects consumers, investors, employers, and employees. He also understands the importance of a reward for effort and will always strive to ensure that Australia's small to medium business are given every opportunity to succeed. Gerard's background means that he has a sound understanding of business principles and is an LNP Senator for Queensland. He recognises the value of strong economic management, property rights, and a just legal system. He is passionate about sustainable land management, ensuring the delivery of sovereign infrastructure and essential service. Gerard was elected to the Senate from the third position of the LNP ticket in 2019. Welcome, Gerard.
Hey, I'm Bill.
Very well, thank you. Just as a start, if you can give us a rundown of maybe some of your misadventures as a child, especially in the country areas where people had a fair bit of freedom of getting around and getting up to their own devices.
Look, you sort of touched on it briefly, but look, I grew up in Chinchilla. My mum was a nurse, dad was a farmer, but, had also been a butcher and a drover and a few other things. We spent most of the time on the farm on weekends. Occasionally I'd go off the odd swimming carnival or something, or play a bit of rugby league. Grew up with, riding motorbikes or, working in the sheep yard or the cattle yard. We were using guns probably by the age of 10, an open sight 22 and probably a 22 to 50 by the time I was 15, driving cars, driving tractors, all that sort of stuff. So, it's not the sort of thing young people in the city do today. Of course, most of them are wedded to their devices from quite an early age, unfortunately. And I think it is a problem going forward. But anyway, that's a conversation for another episode. But yeah, so, I was also a bit of an academic, I guess, and, went away to university and did commerce. Still sort of would like to own a farm one day. And, I keep an eye on the prices out of my hometown of Chinchilla. But, at the moment, that's not really practical to buy anything, given my current role. And yeah, look, got the Bachelor of Commerce, worked back in Dalby for 3 years before going overseas for 7 years, where I worked in finance in London for 2 years, and then was based with a company out of Amsterdam for 3 years. And then quit that and went backpacking for 2 years, came back to Australia where I worked for another 15 years, had 3 children, happily married with my wife, and then I became a senator. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell, I guess.
I suppose you'd be concerned, but with the way things have changed for people in the regions in regards, especially people on the land, in regards to agricultural laws, land management, probably other freedoms that have been chipped away. do you notice that a lot when in your travels in regards to the impact of rising regulations and legislation that are a burden on the farmers in particular?
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. And it's not just increasing regulation; it's the decline of essential services and service delivery to the regions. In particular, it's my favourite bugbear. Of course, is my hometown of Chinchilla. When I grew up there, had a population of about 4,000 people, but it had a maternity ward and 3 midwives, one of which was my mother. Now it's twice as big, has no midwives and no maternity ward whatsoever, and that's despite the fact that Chinchilla, has added even more to the Queensland economy through this, addition of gas wells. Coden Creek Power Station's been built. I think it was early 2000 that was commissioned. So that's a big part in the coal mine that feeds that power station, provides a lot of energy into the national grid. So Chinchilla punches above its weight as far as I'm concerned when you think of all the farming that it provides, as well as the gas, as well as the actual energy into the grid. So you'd think we could at least keep our maternity ward, but no, Labor managed to shut down the maternity ward, and we've lost our council too, thanks Peter Beattie. So basically Chinchilla got amalgamated into the Dalby Shire, as well as along with Tara, Miles, and parts of Wandoan. So my father was the 3rd generation councillor on the Chinchilla Council, and of course now I think we have 2 councillors that represent Chinchilla, or might even only be one actually, represent Chinchilla in the Western Downs Shire. So, but Labor did give us poker machines instead. So more money goes out of the town through the way of poker machines into Tabcorp and whoever else owns those poker machines. So yeah, and I mean that story about Chinchilla has been repeated across the country. I mean across the state and across the country for that matter. And we're in an absurd position, for example, where Gladstone, a big town like Gladstone of 65, almost 70,000 people, has only just got its maternity ward put back on. And I'm not sure how permanent that will be, but the fact that just basic essential services like maternity wards can't be provided into the regions is a complete note of disgrace, especially when you think that the Queensland government just returned a massive surplus on the back of coal royalties, which of course all comes from the regions.
Well, I think that's the issue with most of the regions, is they do all punch above their weight. If you look at export merchandising exports, regional Queensland punches out nearly 89% of that output. And I think in the last 12 months, it's been, if you look at those export figures, we've punched out probably nearly $100 million of the $139 million that have left this state by ship. So regions are definitely contributing, but there doesn't seem to be any recognition of that in regards to the return of services and that to the regions, and nor its potential to actually deliver greater wealth or wealth creation projects.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one of the other tragic things that's happened in the last 30 years has been the lack of dam building, for example. Before Labor got into government in late 1989, the Nationals under Joe Bjelke-Petersen built an enormous number of dams. They opened up the Bowen coal deposits, the Weipa bauxite deposits. They built the Riverside Express in Brisbane, Wivenhoe Dam, the Gateway Bridge, opened up a number of regional universities. And we've seen very little development like that under the Labor government.
That period also gave us things like the Cairns International Airport, which was a great boom for us up here. It opened up both the Surat and Galilee basins, which has generated wealth for not just Queensland, but the whole of Australia. And then it gave us the Burdekin Dam as well, which has the potential, if they actually put in a decent stage 2, as initially proposed, increase the wall height by 14 metres. to even, give us such a pool of water anywhere in Queensland, really.
Yeah, the Burdekin Dam, that's one of Queensland's great infrastructure assets, and it's certainly very valuable. And there's a lot more potential up in North Queensland, for further dams to be built. And certain, I know it can be a touchy topic as to exactly which and what dams should be built up there, but there certainly should be some more built up there.
Yeah, well, of course, and I mean they're the things that provide the opportunity to create wealth, and I think that's one of the things that governments seem to have lost over the years. They're more focused on the 4-year the election cycle, providing or gifting for certain things to encourage voters, but the overall plan from both state and federal governments, there's no real strategic plan for wealth creation. And I suppose one of the things I'm sort of disappointed mostly is if you go back to 2014 under the Abbott government, there was a white paper on the development of Northern Australia. It just hasn't eventuated. We don't seem to ever get the infrastructure or the commitment to do it, or they're always saying, there's prosperity in the north to be had if we develop the north, and it raises its head every once in a while, but there's no deliverables.
That's correct, and unfortunately, this is where the federal-state relations have let us down. I think there was plenty of willingness on behalf of the coalition governments of the last decade to do things in northern Queensland, but the Labor Premier Anna Palaszczuk wouldn't come to the party on building a lot of these things. She opposed the building construction of the Adani mine, which is contributing a lot of money, not quite maybe $1 billion in royalties, but certainly a lot of money in royalties. It will be over $1 billion throughout the life of its mine. She opposed Rookwood Weir just upstream of the Fitzroy up, in Rockhampton there. And that was just a very small water project. But just examples of how hard it was to get anything built. Mind you, was happy to sort of sign off on building the stadium in Townsville and sporting facilities, but not the sort of infrastructure that provides and generates untapped wealth.
It's like the Romans building the Colosseums for the plebs to keep them happy while the things go downhill fast.
Yeah.
Just on that subject of dams there, it's amazing the opposition to dams that give you either potable water for townships to ensure their water security, or dams that provide irrigation and that. There's a general reluctance, and they can find 5,000 reasons to have another study or a review or whatever. But if you want to build a $12 billion hydro dam, it's sort of given a tick, no problem, and they've got the commitment, and then also you got the ridiculous situation where the state government pats itself on the back and blows its trumpet that it's spending again. That's fine, but it's a pumped hydro dam that gives no benefit to the region and is just satisfying the voters, or trying to capture voters in the southeast Queensland that are hooked on renewables.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. There's been a total misallocation of capital into renewable energy that's basically unreliable and inefficient and very expensive at the expense of genuine infrastructure projects that create wealth. And the problem is, it's not only money's been diverted into these renewables that you have to, the money goes offshore to build these renewables because renewables are built offshore, but we're ignoring our own resources. For example, out of Kogan Creek that I mentioned before, power station, there's 400 million tonnes of resources out there of coal. Now, that coal belongs to the Queensland people. All you have to do is basically scoop it up out of the ground a few kilometres from the power station, run it up to the power station, put it in the power station, and it's straight into the Southern Interconnector and down to the southern states. Now, that's a lot more efficient in creating energy than mining lithium, for example, which is a 1 to 2% ore body, i.e., so you have to mine 100 tonnes of ore to get 1 tonne of lithium. And on top of that, you have stripping ratios around that ore body that can be anything up to 9 or 10 times the size of the ore body. So that's, you might have to mine 1,000 tonnes of dirt just to get 1 tonne of ore before that then goes into an intensive electrolysis process to get the lithium out of the ore, which is the metal itself. Then that's shipped on shipped to China where it goes into a battery. Then the car battery might then go to a Tesla factory in Texas before it's put in a car and then comes back to Australia where it's then charged up using coal-powered energy anyway. So it's incredibly inefficient. And I compare our energy market and our economy today to the voting process. I remember when I first started voting in the late 80s, everyone in the country had to vote on the day of the election. You needed a very good reason not to vote on the day of the election. And that was it. So even before, the heavy use of computers, people could still vote on one day. But yet today, even with all the technology, we run pre-poll for 2 weeks and complicate something that really should be done in 1 to 2 days. So, and it's the same for our energy market and a lot of other things, is that we spend a lot of time faffing around, pushing pens, shuffling paper. And I'm thinking of superannuation here and the whole financial engineering industry that's been created out of that, but yet produces nothing. So, these are issues we've got to look at. I mean, the word productivity is thrown around like confetti, but there are some genuine things that can be done to reform productivity in this country.
I think the other thing that's concerning is the government doesn't seem to take any notice of events overseas in regards to new renewables or pursuit papers that come out that show that the earth hasn't got enough resources of the rare metals and a lot of other complex metals to actually complete the first generation of renewables that would basically get us to baseload power. Not that they can ever do it anyway, but there doesn't seem to be any recognition of the limitations of supply in regards to a lot of these metals that are critical. And the other thing they seem to ignore is the fact that everything's got to be done overseas, and we're jeopardising both not only our energy security, we're jeopardising our national security when we're dependent on a supply chain from countries that are not necessarily overly friendly to us anyway.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Bill. I mean, we're outsourcing everything, and we've, if you've ever heard of the book by, the Machiavelli called The Prince, he says your country should never rely on mercenaries or auxiliaries. And that's exactly what Australia does today, is that we rely on other countries to manufacture goods and services. We're now relying on other countries to provide the tools to provide energy through renewable energy. So we're becoming less and less self-sufficient or sovereign every day, and it's just madness what our politicians continue to do.
Well, one of the other things, the problems there too, is we seem to be pushing up our costs of doing business to an extent that we can't get back into that sort of competitive regime where we can actually build and deliver what we need and export at a reasonable cost either. So every step of the way, whether it's wage increase, which in some instance either just indexed or just given, but there's no exchange for increased productivity. So every situation where you have an increase in cost with no gain in productivity is just inflationary and defeats your buying power as well.
Yeah, that's right. And this comes back to the first and foremost is the cost of energy. That's, along with wages, is one of the biggest input costs of running a business. The other thing we should have done when Howard brought in the GST was get rid of payroll tax. Instead, he got rid of stamp duty on share trading, which of course encouraged speculation, but didn't actually encourage people to actually employ more people in the country. So, one of the things I'd like to do if I was ever in charge would be to actually abolish payroll tax altogether and then fund that through the reintroduction of stamp duty on share trading. That used to exist prior to 2000, and it might slow a few day traders down, but ultimately we don't need people sitting at a computer scalping shares. We need them outside, creating goods and services. And the other thing we need to do is increase the rate of tax on profits sent offshore. Australia has an onshore tax rate of 30 cents, and depending on tax treaty, we have an offshore tax rate of between 0 and 15. So is it any wonder that companies send their earnings offshore and then re-borrow it back onshore? So they're switching equity into debt, which increases the cost of capital. So there are three ways of increasing productivity. But the other thing, I'll just keep going there, Bill, though, is we also need to, with our military, when you join the army, in the same way, if you want to become an officer, you've got to get a degree at Duntroon. If you join the army, you should get an apprenticeship. And effectively, we should have an engineering corps within the military. One is a civil engineering corps that builds roads and power stations. And another one is an electrical mechanical engineering corps that builds machinery. And as far as I'm concerned, I think we should take a serious look at bringing back national service. And we really need to get our children out of universities, or at least reduce the number of people going to university, because not only are they getting brainwashed with, Marxist claptrap in those universities, they're wasting 4 to 5 years of the most productive years of their life while they're young, fit and strong, bumming around at university rather than out there actually producing genuine goods and services.
Just touching on a couple of points there, in regards to payroll tax, it's one of the few things that states have got for getting revenue. But I think there's probably an alternative. You could cut the payroll tax on having employees, but then put a levy against the self-service checkouts equal to 6% or something of what they take. Sort of to discourage the proliferation of these bloody annoying things that cuts basic service and interaction with people. I don't know how you feel about that, but I think it's
I'm not
put a levy there with them.
Yeah, that'll increase the cost of food. I'm just going to switch over to my other hand here, if you don't mind. That'll increase the cost of food. I personally would like to crack down on the scalping of high frequency traders, most of whom are overseas, foreign traders anyway. But, look, truth be told, if I had my way, I'd get rid of states tomorrow and push down in the super regionals and let, North Queensland, pick up, draw a line wherever you want, have a North Queensland, maybe a far north region and a northern region and a central region and a Bundaberg region, Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, Toowoomba and Southwest, and a couple of regions in Brisbane, and just let them run the show. And likewise,
we might move on to that topic towards the end.
Yeah, sure.
But the thing is, I suppose we have to deal with what we think. But touching on another thing, I actually was an apprentice in the Air Force, and I left home when I was 15 and joined the Air Force as apprentice electronics and that. And I do think it's something that needs to be, I believe it's still there, but in a very small form. I think it needs to be ramped up, because one of the things, my experience in regards to my service when I joined up in 69, actually, that's a long time ago, but we had 60 young people on our course for electronics technicians. They came from all over Australia, and a good percentage came from Queensland. I would say probably a quarter to a third would come from Queensland. Then New South Wales was next cab off the rank, Victoria, South Australia, West Australia, Tasmania, sort of thing. But we had people from Cloncurry, we had people from Julia Creek, we had people from West Australia, Geraldton, all from South Australia, Tasmania. So you had a big mix of people getting together, and the bulk of them were regional kids. So it gave them an opportunity to strike out from the limitations of what the local country environment had to offer for jobs, and also got them onto a good trade for the future.
Yeah. And that's, I think that way used to work. Unfortunately, with the button plan in 1985, and maybe it wasn't, the intention was the right thing to do, but I think they tried to rationalise manufacturing to the extent where they just let it go offshore. And, you know, look, 70 or 80% of something's better than 100% of nothing. And, you know, combine that with the Dawkins plan in 1990, which encouraged everyone to go and get a university degree instead of a trade. We sort of destroyed our manufacturing industry with a couple of blows there in the late 80s, early 90s.
I think one of the problems there with the university courses and getting a certificate, a diploma or whatever, it's got to a stage where just to get a clerical job, you know, you've got to show you've been to university or something, you know, to be in the front runner. And then sort of early, what they call now in childcare, early childhood education, people coming through universities. That, I mean, it's something that babysitters used to do when they were 13 years old. So I don't think it warrants the cost of those qualifications. But it has become a big industry in regards to getting a job, especially for any public service or anything that's, you know, over-regulated, areas that are regulated, that there's always emphasis on, you know, having a piece of paper rather than, and even things like nursing and teaching, rather than having just a skill, because I'm in favour of going back, especially for primary schools, teachers' college, I think, where they actually learnt as a skill to deliver lessons, and that was their core job, not to get a piece of paper and get indoctrinated to deliver what you know, the hierarchy wants delivered on the children. So anyway,
that's exactly right. I mean, my mother got her general practice ticket and her midwifery ticket, you know, by being in the hospital. She didn't go to university, and that's part of the reason why we can't get midwives out to Chinchilla, because midwifery is its own separate degree. And if you're someone that's spent 3 years studying midwifery, you don't want to go to a small country town where you might deliver, you know, 30 babies over the course of a year or 1 or 2 babies a week. You want to be in one of the bigger hospitals where you're actually, you know, using your degree. And, you know, we've almost over specialised some of these roles. Likewise with teaching, you know, as you say, they can learn in the classroom. And, you know, I've got a cousin who's also a mechanic in the Air Force. I mean, he left school at 15 and you know, basically just became a mechanic by being in the workshop. And they do some study at night time after they work from 9 or 5 or 8 to 5. Then they do some classroom work at night, but they didn't spend 3 years, you know, hanging around classrooms. They were in the workshop, on the workshop, earning some money, getting ahead. And they weren't coming out with a HECS debt. They're actually coming out with a trade, a skill. You know, it's not just a trade, it's a genuine skill and some money in the bank.
I think the other thing is too, I found through my children that going to university, and a lot of times they're not sure what they want to do. And then that first year, somewhere along the line, they might make up their mind. But back in the period of training hospitals and teachers' college, people already knew, you know, these people had a goal. They already decided what their goal was, and it allowed them at the age, you know, of when they finished high school to go directly into that industry and get that basic training. And they wanted to do it because it was a passion, not a opportunity, not a job, if you know what I mean, as a result of getting a university course. And the other thing is they learn a lot more in regards to delivery skills, especially like teachers in training colleges. They come out and they've got all those techniques down pat in regards to giving a lesson plan and those things, where sometimes the people from university haven't even done that part of or gain that skill, but when they're first thrown up to a classroom.
Yeah. I mean, I can't comment on every individual degree, but I do know that, you know, a lot of these degrees don't train them to actually deal with the job once they're in the job. It's just a theoretical. And a lot of these degrees too, they allow the students to pick the courses. So you might do a particular type of degree, but the subjects that you do within that course aren't exactly the most applicable to on the job delivery.
One of the things that's is heading our way at the moment is on 11th of August, there's going to be a bush summit. And I think it starts off in Tamworth on the 11th of August. I think it goes to Perth, Lincoln, Rockhampton, Hobart, and Wodonga. I think they're the 6 destinations. And the inaugural one in Tamworth, the keynote speaker is going to be the Prime Minister and the subject's going to be, delivering for the bush. We've had a lot of these little ventures over the past 10 or so years where there's promotion, like with the former LNP or the Liberal coalition, National Party coalition in Canberra, coming out with the Northern Infrastructure Fund, all those sort of things, but they haven't been all that great on delivery. Are you across this summit that's got to go on, and do you think these things really help, or it's just a chance for the powers that be to lecture the regions what they're going to do for them, but may never occur?
Yeah, I didn't even know the summit was taking place, to be honest, and I can assure you it'll just be a talk fest. You don't really need, you shouldn't know, there's a lot of I've been a politician for 4 years, and there's a lot of people, they spend a lot of time out in the community, supposedly listening to the concerns and all this sort of thing. I would have thought you knew what the concerns were before you became a politician. And when you get in to be a politician, you focus on providing the solutions. And too much time is spent just faffing around, trying to, find out what people's problems are. Well, I can tell you what their problems are, is that they pay too much tax and they don't get enough back in return for it in the way of essential services. And then on the other hand, while governments won't do their job of providing essential services, they're more than happy to interfere in people's personal lives. So, it's got to be reversed. We've got to get out of people's individual lives and just go back to building those providing those macro solutions that an individual themselves can't do.
I'll just chuck up a slide of the summit. That's basically it. It was called Our Brilliant Backyard. Well, I take offence that regions aren't just Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane's backyards. They're actually potential powerhouses of the nation. And a better deal for regional Aussies, well, that should have been there first and foremost forever, because historically, until even up to the 60s, we're a more regionalised country than we were city orientated. That's something that's developed basically only into the 60s and 70s onwards. And we still depend on the regions for the bulk of our wealth. If it wasn't for coal, iron ore, gas, agriculture, all those things that go on in the region, we'd have a pretty poor economy that sort of would bring in any export dollars. And our currency would probably be worth about 10 cents in the US dollar without the regions.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not sure what you want me to say to that directly, but yeah, we've definitely become more and more centralised in the last couple of decades. And, I think half of Australia now lives in Sydney and Melbourne, and 30% of the population weren't even born here. So they have very little appreciation of the regions, because many immigrants just arrive in Sydney and Melbourne and then don't leave it, which isn't, I don't think it's good for building community across Australia and building our national spirit.
Well, I think the thing is now there's such a big disconnect between the people in the cities and their food supply chain, their wealth creation, and that they sort of haven't got any real appreciation for the regions and what they provide, and that seems to be the same for the governments. Their first focus seems to be on ensuring they win those seats that are in highly urban areas, where, like in Queensland case, we've got probably 73 seats within 250 kilometres of the Brisbane CBD, and the other 20 are scattered over the other 1.6 million square kilometres. So that's the disproportion we've got to today, and it's only going to get worse. And so while we sort of have this situation where the focus is on achieving winning the votes in those sectors of Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane, regional seats are sort of still going to be secondary, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's right. And, that's an unfortunate thing about democracy is that, the power is where the density is. And, it is very hard for regional Australia to be heard across the, Canberra Press Gallery, which is pretty much focused on the Canberra bubble. And many of the bureaucrats now are generational, intergenerational bureaucrats. They grow up in Canberra. They have a very top-down approach to things. I know from my own personal experience, they are not interested in providing solutions. They're only interested in if anything, impeding outcomes for regional Australia and empowering and building their own power base.
Well, I think the thing is what with that focus, what you've got to do is grow the empire, your bureaucratic empire, so there's more job opportunities being created there than there is in the regions.
Yep.
Just moving on to water, because that was one of the things that attracted me to having a conversation with you, was the frustration during probably about 12 months ago, I suppose, in regards to water projects. Well, receiving proper action or being actioned by either the Commonwealth or being hindered by the state government in the regions. Especially, I think there was a couple of projects in regional central Queensland in particular that needed the go-ahead, but there was a general disinterest, or that's probably a kind phrase, from the Brisbane government in regards to making sure those projects got off the ground. And it seems that since the last federal budget and the last state budget, there's been a complete disinterest or cutback of water projects, or a lot of them have gone back to review. And that seems to be a big issue right throughout Australia and all the states in regards to water projects. There's a great reluctance to actually deliver any water projects for either irrigation or town water security situations.
Yeah, and that's exactly right, Bill. The Labor state government has opposed just about any water construction projects. And when Albanese got in last year, they put back a lot of water projects that we'd committed to. And obviously, when I say we've committed to, that was always dependent upon the state government approving it as well, because they ultimately the ultimate arbiters of any water regulation within the state. But the Albanese government immediately pushed back infrastructure projects relating to water, as well as a lot of other infrastructure projects, which, given that they've ramped up immigration so much, was counterintuitive and just downright reckless in my view, because to have such a turbocharged immigration rate of 400,000 people, but yet cut back on infrastructure is only a recipe for disaster. And we're seeing that with the shortage of housing and the decline in the service delivery of essential services.
Well, I think the other thing is too that is noticeable is the lack of commitment to infrastructures such as sort of flood mitigation, levies, and those sort of things that we're seeing through recent flooding events and that, which is part of Australian history. And the thing is, when we've continued or ultimately we started from the situation and continue with the situation that build on floodplains where you can expect an inundation somewhere or other, but we've failed to put in the mitigation. And we've got situations like Lismore has been basically hit twice in the last few years with devastating effects. There does seem to be a lack of forethought in regards to this sort of flood mitigation and levee systems for these prone areas, or actually moving the communities to higher ground.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Lismore flood was a bit of a freak event, but it's fair to say that state governments have been improving housing developments in floodplains now for a long time, and it's just another example of the poor service delivery, or in this case, the proper and prudent planning, town planning that's been that hasn't occurred as we've tried to cope with this rapid rise in immigration and population.
Well, I think council's in the same situation. There's a lot of areas that they've basically on floodplains and sort of neglected to sort of either say, well, in these areas we need to build on the first floor, like the old Queensland house or something, or have below ground, garages on the first on ground floor and then the other one upstairs. There does seem to that town planning is lacking in a lot of these areas, and it is a bit of a worry.
Yeah, absolutely, it's a worry. Yeah, totally agree.
I'd like to move on now to just continue on the water theme. Just scrolling up to the next slide. This is a situation for Australia, the mainland Australia. As you can see, mainland Australia, 80% of the rainfall is in the north, is in northern Australia, either going out into the Gulf, into the Pacific, or into the East Timor Sea. So that dwarfs things like the Murray-Darling water capture. Yet we've talked about things like the Bradfield scheme and that over generations. Do you think there's got to be somewhere along the line a reinvestment or a relook at getting water from northern Australia into utilising it first in the first instance in situ in those areas, and B, moving it, if we can, affordably south, but to ignore sort of the major centre where the bulk of your mainland rainfall is, seems pretty counterproductive.
No, I don't think we should move water north to south. I think we should move water east to west. But we've got property out in Western Queensland as well. Trying to move water across Western Queensland down through Western Queensland into Western New South Wales will not work. You will lose most of it through evaporation. But what should happen is that water should be transferred from east to west. And there's a number of locations you can do it. You've got the Dawson, I forget the name of the dam now, just between Taroom and Wandarwin. You can do a project there. There's plenty of projects up in northern Queensland. Like, as you said, once you use it on the eastern side, you can push it out into Hewarden. I don't think it needs to go any further than Hewarden, the black soil around, northern, around that Hewarden area. And the other place you could do it is at Grafton or above Grafton there on the Clarence River, where you've got a 200-kilometre north to south catchment from just outside of Warwick, just south of Warwick, all the way down to where the Clarence turns and heads off through Grafton and Yamba. And there's another 100 kilometres where it travels north from Kempsey before that turn off as well. So you could build about a 10-kilometre tunnel there and push water from the Clarence into the Copeton Dam and out through the Gwyder and into the Murray-Darling that way. So they're the sites that I would look at and just look at pushing water east to west. There's also another spot just south of Warwick where you could possibly push water from the Clarence River back up into the Condamine as well. So that's where I would be just looking at short, when I'll say short, 10, 15 kilometre diversions that just takes it over the gradient and the threshold, water threshold. So instead of it running out the sea, it runs inland before going down into South Australia.
The other thing is too, of course, you just mentioned Hewarden. They've had the Hewarden irrigation project under assessment for a long time, and that that's a fairly easy solution and reasonably economic solution for that area. But there are a lot of other areas in Northern Australia that have potential to be fine agricultural outputs.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got lakelands at the moment, and that could rocket ahead, with the damming of the Palmer River to guarantee a bigger supply. Hughenden is deserving of that project, and I'm sure there's a lot of small scale projects, water projects, that could provide potential for agriculture right throughout the north. Besides any sort of idea for major distribution of water, but just localised capture, storage, and irrigation systems that could be made available with a bit of thought.
No, I totally agree with that. And, not every project has to be a massive dam. There's plenty of places where you can build weirs and just, irrigate the local area, as you say, and use the water in situ rather than transporting it large distances.
Listen, I think that one of the issues too is my pet thing is federation, and I'm a firm believer that the separation of powers from state and federal, and I know people in the federal parliament got frustrated during COVID in regards to that situation, but we do have the situation now where we've got the national water grid, and I think it's got about 180 projects on its books. But if you actually go through a lot of those projects, a lot of them are just maintenance and maybe small upgrades to distribution, pipe works. There's not many additional water storages projects in those. And a lot of them sort of maybe $500 million, not sort of great massive sort of nation building projects, if you know what I mean. Do you think we really, and at the same time, the Albanese government got rid of the Northern Queensland Water Authority as well. They got rid of that. Do you think we need this doubling up where Canberra needs to have this oversight in regards to these sort of projects? Aren't they something that should be just in the domain of the state government, and only sort of projects that are, say, a couple of $1 billion and sort of nation building projects lie with the Commonwealth?
Yeah, no, I don't think we need doubling up, but I think Queensland's getting shafted. And that whole Murray-Darling water basin plan is designed to effectively let more water run out to the sea without using it. I don't know any other civilization that's tried to, use the water that's available to it to its maximum productivity. But yet here in this country, we have a government that wants to push most of it out to sea and not use it at all. So yeah, I mean, it just beggars belief. Yeah.
The other thing that beggars belief is that we haven't got a national register of licence holders for these water licences, and so we can have a look at the people who have a vested interest to make sure water is limited to maximise price. I mean, that's another issue as well. I mean, if we're sending water down the Murray-Darling to flow out to the sea, it is in the best interest of those people with licences that are not involved in agriculture at all, just simply making money from the water itself, selling the water itself. They would like to see that situation continued because it maximises their price, or the price of their water they have to sell.
Yeah, I mean that's fair enough. I'm not up to speed enough with the ins and outs of how that information is stored. I would have thought state governments would have that data, but I don't know what the quality of the data is like.
There's a lot of irrigators who would love to know who actually holds the license, but there is no public register, and that's an issue.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. I do know though that Queensland, any water that leaves Queensland, a large part of it's going to get evaporated before it even gets to South Australia, where it just sits in the lakes down there, Coronga Lakes. And why that's a freshwater lake and not allowed to doesn't allow water to run back into the lake is beyond me. But seawater back into the lake rather than use valuable fresh water in that lake is beyond me. South Australia has always, in my view, been taking the mick in its sort of, in regards to its attitude that it's entitled to water from Queensland and New South Wales, for example.
I don't think South Australia doesn't seem to be very keen on coal-fired power stations or dams itself for its own independent sort of thing and economy. It's quite happy to depend on Victoria for a feed line from their power stations while they got them, and make the water run through New South Wales and Victoria to get their share, as they would call it. But I'd like to move on now to the situation probably provoked by COVID in a lot of instances, with the frustrations of a lot of members of Parliament in regards to state powers, because even people like Barnaby Joyce, who has had a bit of a history of supporting the idea of new states, regional states and that, he got quite angry in that with the states, and even called for the abolition of states. Do you think that's a matter of frustration, or it's a matter of not really being prepared to abide by the Federation and the Constitution that we've come to accept and were given by our forebearers?
Oh, look, times have changed since the Constitution's been written, and the High Court, has watered down a lot of things. I know a lot of people want to take the Constitution as black and white and never change it. And I think that we do need to look at our federation reform. I think it's a dog's breakfast. As we've just pointed out, we have two levels of government dealing with water, two levels of government deal with energy, two levels of government deal with health, education, and throw in councils, big city councils like Brisbane City Council, they get involved with tourism and lots of other things as well. So, look, I think we need a federation convention where we look at the roles and responsibilities of state and federal governments. Step one, probably the first question we should ask is whether we even need states anymore. And if, I don't think we're allowed to do this under the Constitution, is add more states. So why not just have, 50 super regionals of about 500,000 people each, or the regions can have a fewer amount, and the more PACLI, the bigger cities can have more people in their regions because they are closer and they have less infrastructure demands. But look, National Cabinet, COVID just was a disaster, on a number of levels, and not the least was the whole the issue regarding federation and the dysfunctional role of the state and federal governments. And our state governments now, they are just purely political beasts. They aren't interested in service delivery. They will blame the federal government for everything. We saw that when all those people died in aged care homes in Victoria in 2020 in COVID. Daniel Andrews should have put sick people in hospital, but he wouldn't. He locked them down in the aged care centres, and then he blamed the federal government for that. He's a very nasty man, as is, Anna Palaszczuk and Mark McGowan. They were just, as far as I'm concerned, purely evil. And just played politics with people's health and lives for 2 years, and unfortunately, the Morrison government didn't call out their bluff and allowed themselves to get walked over. But anyway, that's history, and I know a lot of people want to move on from that.
I think the situation. I think the situation is there that the first abomination of the whole thing was the creation of the National Cabinet. Now, the Constitution clearly provides separation of powers, and I think the National Cabinet corrupted that, and it also locked out a lot of federal politicians in regards to the proper cabinet and the proper cabinet process, both especially in the federal government. This situation where the premiers could just come along and talk to the Prime Minister and a couple of high-ranking others, and then start getting their way was a complete it was an abomination, I think, and it's a complete distortion of our federal system.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no one elected the premiers to run the federal government, and that's what. But that's Scott Morrison's fault. I mean, he let it happen, and he pushed out the federal ministers, with the exception of Greg Hunt. Unfortunately, I mean, he was the worst minister to keep in the loop. But other ministers were pushed to one side. And to be fair, I mean, I was part of that government. The ministers let it happen. They should have pushed back on Morrison. I know I did, and a few of us did, but we didn't really get listened to. So anyway, that's the situation we're at today. But look, I'll state what I said when I first in my maiden speech. We need a constitutional convention to sort out the roles and responsibilities of state and federal governments, and the sooner we have it, the better.
Well, my position is we already have a constitution that lay that out pretty clearly, but things like changing income tax from being a state responsibility to the federal government temporarily during World War II, but it was never given back. And
that's a good thing. Listen, let me tell you.
No, well, the federal government has got certain roles, and it's basically can't even do those properly in regards to its defence and things like that. It's got some really important roles it should be running with. It shouldn't be running education, health, and that, which is the areas of the state responsibility. If you go to mix them up, well, then of course it becomes distorted. But the Constitution provides us with a lot of avenues to move ahead. As you said, we can have additional states that gets us to a situation. There's a whole chapter 6 of the Constitution provides for new states. That should have been the pathway to create more regionalised state holdings. Like by now we should have, even before federation, we should have had at least North Queensland and Central Queensland as colonies. And by now we should have had far North Queensland, Central Queensland, Isaac and Mackay as a state, and then other states. And that's the situation we should have got ourselves in. And then we have that more direct relationship between the Commonwealth function and the areas that are actually should be delivering services to, like you say, 500,000 people or so. And that there's a potential there to do it. But the big stumbling block, of course, is I don't know why our founding fathers did it, but they made the start process inside the state government of the areas that want to separate. Before we had federation, if people in an area, like when Queensland separated from New South Wales, the people of Wide Bay, Burnett, Maranoa and Moreton Bay were basically got together and sent a petition and through the then governor to the colonial office to ask for a new colony. And so they didn't even have to sort of go to get approval from the Sydney Parliament. Yeah, that was bypassed. So, but when our founding fathers decided, they decided to put the start point within the control of the current state governments. But otherwise, I think you would probably have New England and Riverina as states a long time ago as well.
Yeah. Hey, Bill, I've got to head off. Sorry.
Okay, then.
So, we might call it quits at that, eh?
Yeah, it's just on the hour anyway. But look, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it, and I hope that all things go well for you in some measure in regards to moving on to the federal election. It's a bit of a situation that you've been removed from the number 3 position on the ticket, but that's a bit of a hard one to win sometimes unless there's a double dissolution. But hopefully you have another avenue to serve the people of Queensland after that period.
Yeah, cheers. Yeah, we'll see what happens, Bill. Just taking it day by day at the moment, but yeah, I've got another 2 years to go, so I'll keep throwing spears until my time's up.
Well, there's plenty of work to do, especially for regional Queensland.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
If you just hold a couple of seconds, I'll just introduce the next episode and then sign off. If you If you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our next interview will be with Mr. Wilmot from the Property Rights Association of Australia, and we'll be looking at the impacts of new legislation on property owners as we move forward in regional Queensland. So please join us then. Thank you.